The inside of that MRI machine was like being stuck inside a washing machine full of angry pots and pans. I remember lying there, sticky from sweat, trying to hold still for what felt like 50 years. I kept thinking, this is what they call healthcare now. When I was running the cafeteria back in Akron, healthcare meant eating a yeast roll and wiping down the counter with a strong lemon cleanser. Simple. Good. I'm Dorothy May, but everyone calls me Dot. I'm 78, and the rhythm of my life used to be as steady as the kneading machine I ran for 40 years. Now, since George passed 5 years ago, my life is just the house we paid off in the 60s. The walls are kind of faded, but they are mine. The trouble wasn't a crash. It was just a drift. A bone-deep tiredness that felt like somebody had poured concrete in my veins. I'd stand up too fast to water the petunias on the porch, and the whole world would tilt. It wasn't scary at first, just annoying. Old Dr. Jenkins, bless his heart, said it was just age. He told me to eat more fiber and call him in a year. But Susan, my daughter-in-law, she didn't like simple answers. Susan is married to my Michael, and she is sharp. Not sharp like a knife, but sharp like a tax auditor. She read things online about maximizing Medicare and proactive health. It sounded fancy, but what it really meant was that she took over. "Mom, Dr. Jenkins is a dinosaur," Susan announced one Sunday, stacking a terrifying pile of financial papers on my kitchen table. "Michael and I worry about you living alone. We need diagnostics. A modern team." She took charge faster than I could roll out dough for 200 kids. One morning I was fine. The next I was drowning in paperwork and appointments. First came the blood work. A whole battery of tests, like they were looking for oil instead of cholesterol. Then came the stress test. My heart was perfectly fine, always had been. But Susan said, "Nonsense, Mom. Better safe than sorry." The stress test left me nauseated for a whole day. The sickness wasn't from a diagnosis. It was from the testing itself. I tried to tell Susan that a TV doctor said 40% of these tests give false alarms for people my age. But she just tapped her perfect fingernails on the calendar and looked at me like I was being difficult. I told myself, she's worried. She's just trying to be efficient. I had to be grateful. If I wasn't grateful, I was a burden. But the dizziness didn't go away. It got worse. Sometimes I felt so weak just standing up I had to grab the counter just to pour a glass of tea. And Susan, she was always there to catch me. But she looked more impatient than concerned. Next, it was the bone density scan, the DEXA scan. It meant fasting, and fasting at 78 makes you feel like a wet noodle. The doctor said my bones look fine for my age. I mumbled, exhausted. "But we need a baseline, Mom," Susan insisted. The next thing I knew, I was swallowing bisphosphonate medication just in case. They gave me this burning heartburn that felt like acid was climbing up my throat, and my teeth felt sensitive, like they were shrinking. I told Susan, but she just smiled that tight smile. "That's just the drug working, Mom. It means your bones are stabilizing." I felt terrible. Worse than before all this proactive health started. I felt like a pinball being bounced from one specialist to the next, and Susan was the paddle pushing me harder and harder. If it ain't one thing, it's another, I thought, just trying to keep up. Then came the real panic. I forgot the name of the new neighbor, a sweet girl who gave me gladiolas. I just blanked. Susan immediately scheduled an MRI of my brain. I spent another awful hour in that machine. Michael came too, looking miserable. The neurologist spoke fast, pulling up black and white pictures of my head. "It's just mild age-related findings, Dorothy. Nothing acute." I watched Susan's face, For a split second before she could smooth it out, I saw something flicker there. It wasn't relief. It looked like disappointment, like she was hoping for a bigger problem. "Well, we've ruled that out," Susan said brightly, pulling my hand as if I needed help getting up. "But there's still that gut trouble from the heartburn. We need to check for everything. We must schedule a full colonoscopy, Mom. It's time." I was terrified. George had died after complications from surgery, and I was 78. I was tired of the fasting, the invasive procedures, the fear of what they might dig up next. The stress and the constant worrying were making me weaker than the dizziness ever did on its own. Every time I had one of Susan's expensive, specialized protein shakes, I felt the nausea kick in right after. I started to wonder if I was just imagining it, if the drugs were making me crazy. One afternoon, I was supposed to be resting after a particularly brutal prep for a scan that Susan had scheduled and then canceled last minute. A wasted trip, more money spent. I was lying in my old recliner feeling too sick to move when I heard Susan talking on her phone in the hallway. She was speaking too quietly, too intensely. Her voice was low and calculated, nothing like the forced sweet tone she used when she brought me my pills. I pushed myself up slowly. The dizziness hit, a sharp, familiar wave, but I held on to the wall. I crept silently to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. "Michael, I told you. The insurance is covering the bulk of the tests for now. But once they identify her as high risk, we can transition her to the facility easily. She's too much trouble here, and honestly—" Susan paused, and I heard a cold, calculating laugh catch in her throat. A wave of icy shock hit me, worse than any physical dizziness. It wasn't the tests that were making me weak. It was something else. Susan wasn't managing my health. She was managing my decline. My legs felt suddenly heavy, but I stayed pressed to the door. I heard her deliver the final, devastating sentence. It wasn't about saving my life. It was about ending my presence here. "We just need one more strong push, Michael. Once she's deemed fully incapacitated, the house is ours, and she'll be their problem." That night, the cold settled into me worse than the fear of a bad diagnosis. Susan's words, "The house is ours," played over and over, drowning out the TV and the hum of the refrigerator. The dizziness, the tiredness, the heartburn that felt like lava. None of it was random. It was being done to me. I couldn't just march out and yell at her. If I did that, she'd just say I was confused or paranoid, and they'd rush me into that facility even faster. Susan didn't use violence. She used paperwork and doctors. I had to be smarter than the forms. I had to start watching her the way a cat watches a mouse hole. Quiet, still. I started noticing patterns. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, because I didn't want to believe it. But Susan had made me look. The dizziness was the worst, that awful tilt when I stood up. I realized it always hit hardest, right after she gave me the morning pill and that special protein shake. She was so insistent I drink the whole thing down. She said it was for energy. I started hiding some of the shake. I'd take 3 big sips while she watched, then tell her my stomach was upset from the heartburn. When she left the room, I'd pour the thick, sickly sweet liquid into the soil of the large potted fern by the window. I didn't want to waste food, but I had to know. Sure enough, the days I dumped most of the shake, the dizziness wasn't quite so sharp. It was still there, but it was just regular old dot dizziness, not the kind that felt like a sledgehammer. The days I drank it all, I felt like I needed to crawl back into bed an hour later. I mentioned the heartburn again. It was a constant burning sensation, like acid had eaten right through my esophagus. "Susan, this bisphosphonate medicine is killing my stomach. I don't think I can keep taking it." Susan didn't even look up from her phone. She just smiled that thin, tight smile. "That's just the drug working, Mom. It means your bones are stabilizing. We have to keep you on the regimen if we want to avoid future fractures. That's why we need that colonoscopy scheduled right away, to check your gut health." She was using the side effect of one drug to justify another, more expensive, more invasive procedure. It was a loop, a trap. The drugs made me sick, and the sickness proved I was frail. I felt like I was losing my mind, but the physical symptoms were too real to ignore. It had been easier when I thought I was just getting old. Now, every ache was a point against me, a point Susan would use. Susan ramped up the pressure on the colonoscopy. She said the insurance pre-authorization was about to expire. "We need this final diagnosis, Mom. The doctor said we can't wait." The dread was thick, but it wasn't the procedure itself I feared most anymore. It was the idea that this diagnosis was the last piece of paperwork needed to lock me away and sell my house. I felt like a stray cat being fattened up for Christmas dinner. I needed help, but Michael was useless. He just nodded when Susan told him to. He had been a nice boy, but he grew into a man who hated confrontation. He had lost his good job 5 years ago, and Susan had been running their life. And now, mine. Ever since. They needed that house money. They needed me gone. I couldn't risk calling my old friends. Susan tracked my phone calls. I couldn't write letters. She handled the mail. Help showed up in the most ordinary way. It was my neighbor, Esther. Esther was 65, a retired physical therapist, and she lived right across the street. She was a quiet woman, always puttering with her herb garden. I thought she didn't pay much attention to the world, but I'll tell you what, she saw everything. One afternoon I was trying to water my petunias, the ones Susan said were a tripping hazard, and I stood up too fast from the porch swing. That wave of dizziness hit hard, and I actually had to grab the railing to keep from falling onto the porch. Esther was walking by, carrying a basket of green beans. She dropped them immediately and rushed over. "Dot! Dot, lean on me!" She held my elbow, waiting for the world to stop spinning. The color must have drained right out of my face because she looked at me with deep concern. "That's orthostatic hypotension, dear," Esther said softly once I was steady. "That sharp dizziness when you change position. It's common, but when it's that extreme, it's usually signaling something deep. Or maybe too many drugs." Her eyes met mine, and there was a knowing in them that cut through all the medical jargon and the fear Susan had built around me. She saw past the performance. I pulled her into the house. Closing the door tight, I whispered everything. Susan, the phone call, the house, the tests, the constant exhaustion. I told her about the protein shakes, the heartburn, and the rush to the colonoscopy. Esther sat me down at the kitchen table. She didn't look shocked. She looked like she had been expecting it. "She's overloading your system, Dot. She's using the testing to create fear, and the side effects to create proof of frailty. She's a professional medical auditor, and she's found your weakest point." Esther was sharp as a tack. She immediately zeroed in on the drugs. "Those bisphosphonates," Esther said, pointing to the bottle. "The ones that give you the terrible acid reflux. Do you take them with water?" "Yes, always water," I said. "And after you take them, what does Susan have you do?" I thought hard. "She rushes me to breakfast. Then after I eat, she often tells me to lie down on the sofa to rest before the next appointment. Sometimes she gives me coffee right after the pill, too." Esther slapped the table, Not hard, but with frustration. There it is. The worst heartburn in the world. Dot, those pills must be taken with a full glass of plain water, and you must remain perfectly upright for 30 minutes, not sitting, standing, or walking around. If you lie down, the pill can get stuck, dissolve in your throat, and cause ulceration or horrible reflux. Susan knows this, Dot. She's a nurse consultant. She's deliberately creating that agonizing heartburn to make you miserable and sick. I felt sick all over again. The burning in my chest wasn't just a side effect. It was calculated suffering. And the dizziness, Esther continued, her voice low. It's the orthostatic hypotension. Your blood pressure is dropping too fast when you stand up. If we stop the falls, we stop her proof of incapacity. Susan is counting on you being wobbly. Esther got out her blood pressure cuff. She was quiet and professional. Okay, Dot. Sit still for 2 minutes. She took my sitting blood pressure. 145/95. A little high, but not terrible. Now, she instructed, I want you to stand up, fast. I did, holding her shoulder for balance. The room swam violently. My ears rang. I waited 30 seconds, trying to breathe through the dizzy wave. She measured again. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the numbers. Dot, you dropped to 118/78. That's a 27-point drop in the top number and 17 points on the bottom. That is a textbook severe orthostatic drop. No wonder you're grabbing the counter. That's what she's been pushing you toward. The proof wasn't the life insurance policy. The proof was the calculated pain, the induced weakness. Susan was deliberately mishandling my medications and pushing me through stressful procedures, all to secure the house and the insurance payout. The anger was hot and heavy in my chest, replacing the fear. I wasn't sick. I was being poisoned. I made my decision right there. I'm not going to let this happen. Over my dead body. What do I do, Esther? She has another appointment scheduled for tomorrow morning. We fight fire with water, Dot. We fix the symptoms, and we gather the proof. We don't need a colonoscopy. We need a defense strategy. Esther leaned in close. First, we fix the drops. We fix the orthostatic dizziness. Susan wants you wobbly. We make you steady. Esther showed me the technique right there. It was simple, something anyone could do, but something Susan had kept hidden by rushing me constantly. It's called the positional pause, Esther explained. Every time you move, from lying down to sitting or sitting to standing, you pause. You count to 30. 30 slow, deep breaths. You let your body catch up before you try to walk. You are retraining your autonomic nervous system. I practiced standing up from the chair. I stood up, waited the full 30 seconds, focusing on keeping my knees locked slightly and my breath steady. The dizzy wave was still there, but it was shallower, manageable. That drop in BP is what proves you're frail enough for the facility paperwork, Esther stressed. We need to stabilize that 27-point drop. We need to cut it in half, then in half again. Esther gave me a few other tips. Massive salt intake. I needed more sodium because the drugs were flushing me out, and to monitor my fluid intake religiously. Susan tells you to drink those fancy shakes, but she's likely using them to mask the dehydration and electrolyte imbalance that makes the dizziness worse. Drink plain water, Dot, lots of it, and keep track. Esther also gave me the tool I needed for the legal fight, a tiny digital recorder disguised as a keyring. It had a little red light to show it was on. You need evidence, Dot. Susan's records are spotless, I guarantee you. Get her voice. Get her stating the intent or the timeline. Michael won't testify against her, so it has to be undeniable. The next morning, I started my secret recovery regime. I started taking the bisphosphonates properly. Full glass of water standing against the kitchen counter for 30 minutes, looking out at the morning sun. The heartburn vanished immediately. It was like night and day. The pain wasn't from the drug itself. It was from Susan's specific, intentional sabotage. When Susan brought me the shake, I faked a cough and said, "Oh, Susan, my stomach is just awful today. Too much acid from the pills. I think I'll just have half, dear. I don't want to waste it." Susan looked annoyed but didn't argue. She needed me to appear cooperative, not argumentative. I started practicing the positional pause everywhere. I looked ridiculous, pausing for 30 seconds every time I stood up. But I didn't care. If Susan was nearby, I'd fake a little wobbly step afterward just to keep the act up. The change in my physical state was unbelievable. After just 2 days of proper drug intake and focused positional pause work, I could feel the difference. Esther came back over secretly, while Susan was out grocery shopping for her special healthy foods. I sat down and stood up quickly. We measured my blood pressure again. Sitting. 135/90. An immediate improvement. Standing, after the 30-second pause. 127/84. "Dot!" Esther whispered, thrilled. "That's only an 8-point drop on the systolic. We cut the drop by almost 20 points in 2 days. You are no longer critically orthostatic. You are standing firm. The truth will set you free." The dizziness was practically gone. It had never been age. It had been dehydration and a huge drop in blood pressure caused by intentional neglect. I had the health part figured out, but Susan was still pushing the final procedures. She was furious about the cancelled scan and desperate to get the colonoscopy done. "Mom, the hospital called. We have to confirm the time for Thursday's procedure. You need to do the prep tomorrow night." I smiled weakly. "Oh, yes, dear. Whatever the doctor says. I'm just so tired." I played the part of the defeated invalid perfectly. That evening, Susan came into my room to check on me, frowning slightly. She noticed that the bottle of bisphosphonate pills, which I had secretly been counting, was almost empty. I had deliberately placed a spent, empty bottle on the nightstand, making it look like I had run out, or worse, forgotten to take them. Susan's eyes narrowed on the empty container. This was a gift to her. Clear evidence of non-compliance and poor judgment. Perfect for her facility transfer report. She snatched the bottle. "Oh, Mom, look at this. You've run completely out. How many days have you been off them?" she said, her voice dripping with false concern, but her eyes held a calculating light. "Oh, dear. I don't know, Susan. Time just flies when you're resting," I mumbled, feigning confusion. She snatched her phone and marched toward the hallway, already dialing Michael. I knew she was going to use this non-compliance as the final nail in the coffin. She'd call the facility, accelerate the transfer, and schedule the paperwork signing immediately after the colonoscopy. I quietly activated the keyring recorder. The tiny red light was almost invisible in the evening gloom. I was supposed to be resting, but I slid out of bed, steady as a rock, thanks to Esther's technique. I was wearing my sturdiest dress shoes, not slippers. I waited in the dark hallway near the door, leaning against the wall, but not needing the support. Susan's voice was low and harsh into the phone. "Michael, she ran out of her medication. She claims she forgot." I have the perfect grounds for non-compliance. The facility director said if we can get the dependency papers signed by Friday, they can fast-track the acceptance. The colonoscopy is Thursday. I'll make sure the intake paperwork is ready to sign right after. We have to move quickly. The closing date on the house loan is next month, and we need access to that equity." She paused, a harsh, calculating exhale. "I need her, signed off as completely dependent by Friday, or we lose the house." I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't get dizzy. The anger kept me straight. I had the motive, the specific timeline, and the criminal intent. Susan hung up, a look of focused determination on her face. She stopped dead in the doorway of my bedroom, expecting to find me frail, woozy, and incapacitated in my nightgown. Instead, I was standing there, fully balanced, perfectly steady, holding the keyring recorder up so the tiny red light was clearly visible. My hand didn't shake, not a bit. The woman who was supposed to be weak and confused was standing tall. Susan's mouth opened, forming a question, but no sound came out. I lifted my other hand slowly, revealing the perfectly organized stack of documents Esther had helped me compile, the life insurance policy confirming Susan's financial interest, and the medical leaflet for bisphosphonates, highlighting in bright yellow every error Susan had forced upon me. "I heard the whole thing, Susan," I said. My voice was low, steady, and nothing like the mumble she was used to. "I'm not confused. I'm not non-compliant. And I won't be at the facility on Friday. You will be somewhere else entirely. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story will travel." It was Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock sharp. The setting was the Akron Title and Escrow Office, a place Susan had chosen for the final, innocuous signing of what she believed were Michael's business papers. The room was sterile, modern, and smelled of new carpet. Sitting around the polished cherrywood table were Susan, impeccably dressed and radiating tense professionalism, and Michael, looking miserable and hunched over the forms. Across the table sat Mr. Henderson, the title agent, who shuffled papers with practiced detachment. I entered last, leaning heavily on the cane Esther had insisted I bring one last time. I played the part of the tired, confused woman perfectly, sinking into the armchair with a sigh that seemed to deflate the whole room. Susan gave me a brief, condescending pat on the shoulder. "Just a few signatures, Mom. Then we can get you home to rest for tomorrow's procedure," she whispered, her voice tight with forced concern. She started to hand me the dependency paperwork, which she had disguised as a new Medicare authorization form. Before I could take the pen, the heavy oak door opened again, and Susan froze. Entering the room were Esther, my neighbor, carrying a briefcase, and Detective Sergeant Miller, of the Elder Protective Services Unit. Beside the detective walked Robert Hayes, an attorney who specialized in elder law, whom Susan had never met. Susan's face crumpled from practiced calm to sheer terror. Michael gasped, dropping his pen. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Susan demanded, rising abruptly. "Mom, who are these people? Are you having one of your episodes?" I looked at the dependency papers lying next to the pen. I placed my cane on the floor and pushed myself fully upright. The sudden move, which weeks ago would have sent me crashing to the floor, was now smooth and solid. I walked around the table, taking 3 firm, steady steps until I stood directly opposite Susan. The cane remained abandoned by my chair. The movement drew all eyes. Michael stared at me like I was a ghost. Susan stepped backward, her face ashen, seeing the woman who was supposed to be weak and wobbly standing tall, centered, and terrifyingly clear-eyed. "The episodes are over, Susan," I said. My voice was low, firmer than it had been in years. "They were engineered by you, and now I've engineered the cure." I placed the tiny keyring recorder on the table. It was small, black, and utterly damning. I pressed the play button, Susan lunged, trying to snatch the device, but Detective Miller placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, restraining her easily. The recording of Susan's voice, cold and sharp, filled the quiet room. The closing date on the house loan is next month, and we need access to that equity. I need her signed off as completely dependent by Friday, or we lose the house. The title agent, Mr. Henderson, quickly pushed his chair back, distancing himself. Michael just stared at the floor, his shoulders shaking slightly. Susan attempted to regain control, sputtering. That is edited. It's a misunderstanding. I was talking about needing Michael's help managing her affairs, not... Esther stepped forward, placing a thick manila envelope next to the recorder. You didn't need help, Susan. You needed a diagnosis. And when the MRI failed, you manufactured one. Esther opened the envelope and spread 3 documents on the table. The bisphosphonate instruction leaflet, a detailed log of the times Susan had administered the pills, and a printed graph of my blood pressure readings. These pills, Esther pointed to the leaflet, must be taken with a full glass of water, remaining upright for 30 minutes to prevent severe esophageal damage and nausea. Dot's log shows that 70% of the time, you rushed her, gave her coffee, or forced her to lie down immediately. You deliberately caused the agonizing heartburn and nausea, using it as proof of her declining gut health to justify the invasive colonoscopy procedure. Then I took the floor again, tapping the blood pressure chart. And the dizziness. That was your final proof of frailty. Before proper care, when I stood up quickly, my blood pressure plummeted from 145/95 to 118/78. That 27-point systolic drop is a textbook severe orthostatic crisis. It made me wobbly. It made me fall. It made me, on paper, incapacitated. Robert Hayes, the lawyer, pointed to the large sum written on Susan's insurance policy document. The life insurance policy pays out $450,000 upon the declaration of full incapacitation resulting in required facility placement. The house equity, which you needed access to for your loan closing, is valued at $320,000. Total immediate liquid assets, upon Mrs. May's removal, $770,000. Susan's mask cracked completely. Her breathing hitched, transforming her controlled fear into desperate tears. She shoved Detective Miller's hand off her arm and threw herself at me, grabbing my wrist. Mom, please. I am your daughter-in-law. I've been calling you Mom for 10 years. You can't do this. Think about Michael. He'll lose everything. You're putting him in jail over a misunderstanding about pills and a little dizziness, she wailed, her grip surprisingly strong. I looked down at the hand clutching my arm, the hand that had mixed my pills, timed my distress, and signed the paperwork to send me away. I pulled my arm free, slowly, deliberately. My voice was cold, devoid of the warmth that had fueled 40 years in a kitchen, devoid of the fear that had plagued me for 2 years. I worked 40 years in the school cafeteria, on my feet, baking 500 rolls a day, so I could buy and pay off that house, Susan. I survived 2 recessions and 2 bad bosses to keep my home safe. You planned to poison my peace and my body with calculated neglect for $770,000. You stopped being family the moment you used my health readings to calculate when I would fall. Your problem is not a misunderstanding. Your future is not my problem. Detective Miller stepped forward, his face grim. He placed cold steel handcuffs around Susan's wrists, clicking them shut. Susan May, you are under arrest for attempted elder abuse, aggravated battery, and fraud. Susan screamed, a harsh animal sound that startled Michael, who was still sitting frozen. She fought briefly, but Detective Miller and his partner, who had been waiting outside, escorted her out of the office, her perfectly tailored suit now looking ridiculous against the silver cuffs. Michael did not move or speak. Robert Hayes immediately had Mr. Henderson annul all existing and propose documents related to my finances or the house deed. Michael was left sitting alone at the table, utterly shattered and silent. I did not look back at the son who had allowed his mother to be systematically destroyed. In the ensuing trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Facing the keyring recording and Esther's meticulous documentation of the calculated medical neglect, Susan pleaded guilty to felony elder endangerment and financial fraud. She was sentenced to 8 years of reclusion in state prison, lost her professional nursing license permanently, and was ordered to pay me a substantial civil fine for emotional distress and punitive damages. Michael, unable to deal with the debt and the loss of Susan's income, had no choice but to file for divorce, and was completely disowned by the family, now ostracized by the community. He was last seen moving to another state, bankrupt and isolated. Susan had sought ultimate control and wealth and lost everything: her career, her freedom, her reputation, and her marriage. My own recovery continued, dramatically and visibly. A year and a half after the confrontation, I was 79 years old and thriving. I had sold the large house, which held too many bad memories, and used the proceeds, along with the civil penalty, to purchase a smaller sunny cottage in a supportive 55-plus community nearby. My physical stabilization was astounding. By consistently practicing the positional pause technique, the dangerous orthostatic drop of 27 points, systolic and 17 points diastolic, was permanently stabilized to a negligible 3-point drop. My resting blood pressure, which had soared to 145/95 during the abuse, now averaged a healthy 125/80. I had shed the 15 pounds of water retention and stress weight. I walk 2 miles every morning now. My day starts with sunlight and my own homemade yeast rolls, not expensive protein shakes. With Esther's help, I established a small, community-based initiative called the Standing Firm Circle. We meet every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at the community center, teaching seniors self-advocacy and postural stabilization techniques. It's simple, I tell the women in the circle, holding up a printout of my old blood pressure log. Susan wanted this 27-point drop to prove I was unfit, but I learned how to stand up. Every time you move, from sitting to standing, you pause. You count to 30. You let your body catch up. You stabilize that blood pressure. We are not an expensive foundation. We are just grandmothers helping each other not to fall. Esther is the technical advisor, and I handle the logistics. The Standing Firm Circle now serves over 120 local seniors, giving them the knowledge to track their own numbers and question aggressive, unnecessary medical procedures. I have more energy today than I did 20 years ago. The house that Susan coveted is now the bedrock of my freedom, used to ensure others do not become victims of the kind of calculated frailty she engineered. I look at my community, built on trust and self-knowledge, and I feel a deep, quiet sense of triumph. Susan wanted me too dizzy to stand, counting on me to fail the test of gravity. She wanted me to die quietly, alone, burying my insurance policy and my title deed. But the most complete form of justice, I've learned, is when the victim lives. It is when the body that was supposed to betray you instead saves you. I stand now, in the sun, my feet solid on the ground. My blood pressure is steady. My mind is clear. I remember everything, and the revenge the wicked fear most is the one that is achieved with a simple, deliberate pause, and the quiet certainty of knowing your own name. And if you stayed with me until the end, leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the story and what kinds of stories you'd like to read more of. Thank you so much for being here. See you in the next emotional story.